All right, we are live here with what's going on with shipping. I talked about the other day that we had a 3-year anniversary, and the very first show we ever did was myself and John Konrad from gCaptain. So I thought I'd ask John Konrad back over. Unfortunately, this is not the 3-year anniversary of the show. This is a tragedy that just unfolded in Baltimore this morning. So I thought, John, I would have you kind of give us a rundown of what you know so far. People have probably been listening and following me. I've been doing media all day. I know you have too. So I thought I'd go ahead and get you going here.
Yeah, first I have to give a shout out to my daughter Eleanor. Originally she had her birthday, and I missed some media and gave them to you, and that I think helped launch your channel. But she just got her permit yesterday. I was supposed to take her driving today, so I was expecting a collision to happen. I just wasn't expecting it so early in the morning. But thank you, Eleanor, for letting me do this and letting your mom take you out driving. But this is a big incident. I mean, I saw that video, Sal, and I had to watch it a couple times. I thought it was a computer animation at first. I mean, it really hit hard, and we don't know exactly what's happening. Even talking to experts all day, what we do know is that they departed the container terminal. They did a YouTube to line up in the channel. They were going about 8 knots, and at some point they lost steering and or propulsion. We're not 100% sure which. And they first of all they let the tugs go 17 minutes before the allision, and then they ran into these problems. That's the basics. Now, what caused this? I can tell you for certain it wasn't aliens. It wasn't spies from Russia coming in. There are a million conspiracy theories out there on the internets and Twitter, and 99% of them are wrong. What could have caused this is, there are things that we have not been able to rule out yet, including that the theory I'm getting the most from talk to dozens of experts, ship captains, chief engineers, naval architects today. The theory that keeps coming up the most. It's not necessarily the most correct, but the one that's gaining the most traction among experts was a switch from maneuvering diesel to at-sea diesel, the very low sulfur diesel oil, and that could have potentially the crew misaligned that tank, or they got a dirty batch of oil, or we know that there have been plastics in the oil that have been causing, some of the refiners dumping plastics in the oil, which have been causing engine failures. That's one theory. Another theory is that
And
the
we've seen that,
engine.
John. I mean, we've seen
Yes.
examples of that. I mean, there have been vessels out there where that has happened.
Absolutely, it's a reoccurring problem. So going back to the days of Bunker C, you could shove anything in that. The Bunker C was the residual, the nasty stuff, whatever was left after you take the gasoline and the diesel out of the refining process, the nasty crude oil sediment, and that we used to dump paint in there, or you could dump anything in there. The old steam ships would burn it. And then what happened was they came out with diesel engines, and diesel engines still burn some nasty stuff, nowhere near as bad. But the refineries, when they're left over with this residual plastic, it costs a lot of money to dispose of it properly. So dump it in the diesel, and the ships ran off a high sulfur diesel oil, so that sulfur would break down the residual plastic. Not very good for the environment, but okay for the ship engine. But when the IMO went to the low sulfur diesel oil in 2020, they removed that sulfur, so they didn't have the chemicals. The diesel was too clean to destroy these residual plastics. Now, what's the legality of refineries putting this nasty stuff in oil? We don't know, but we do know that it has caused problems in the last 2 years. We don't know specifically that it caused this problem, but you see, the ship lost power, and then when it regained power, regained light, you saw a nasty exhaust, really dark exhaust. So it seems like they switched tanks, or were putting a lot of stress on the engine. Another theory is that they went into reverse, and we've seen a lot of problems when a ship comes into a harbor now. They have to do emergency astern test before they, while they're still at sea, before they come into the harbor, because they'd rather have that ship fail out there than in the harbor. This has led to some incidents. The Ambrose Light Tower off New York City was famously destroyed when a ship went to crash astern and blacked out and drifted right into the Ambrose Light Tower, which used to be a lightship. So that's one theory. Another theory is it was late at night. The engine crew wanted to go to sleep, so they switched to automatic control and headed up to their bunks, and there was a computer malfunction. The engine room is supposed to stay down in the engine room during maneuvers, and it's not till you get out to sea that they switch to automatic control. I've heard other theories that there was potentially a small fire down there. We don't know exactly what happened. We do know that it lost power, appeared to have lost steering, and that was, without those tugboats, it was almost impossible for the pilots to recover from.
Yeah, and with that, John, I want to add something. This is just out from CNN. They interviewed Clay Diamond, the executive director, general counsel of the American Pilots Association. These are the American pilots are the ones who board the vessel. In this case, there were Chesapeake Bay pilots on board. Is what Clay had to say. Just minutes before the bridge, there was a total blackout on the ship, meaning that the ship lost power, lost engine power, and electrical power. It was a complete blackout. The pilot did everything he could have done. The pilot quickly gave a string of orders calling for a hard rudder to port as hard left as possible and for the anchor to be dropped. Additionally, Diamond said the pilot was the one who contacted the pilot dispatch office to shut down traffic to the bridge. Those were all appropriate steps, but it happened so quickly and with so little lead time, neither one of these maneuvers were enough. It goes on here. Diamond pointed out that while the lights on the boat could be seen turning back on, likely due to an emergency generator activating after the initial blackout, the ship's engines never got running again. Quote, it's not unheard of for there to be an engine and generator casualty going out like it happened here. It just happened at the exact wrong time and place. Having it happen where it did and when it did was the real problem here. If it happens in open ocean or in an open part of the river or the bay, yes, it could be a problem, but there's more room and time to react. Pilots are the most highly trained mariners in the world. It takes many years to become a pilot, and there are local experts in the waterway. I'm really taken aback by the fact that this is happening almost 2 years after Everforward coming out of Baltimore, where the circumstances for that wreck was or grounding was a pilot. We know it. The pilot was distracted. I don't think that's the issue here at all. I think again the circumstances. The question here is what causes the power outage. Was it mechanical? Was it fuel? Was it electrical? Was it somebody tripping the wrong switches? What was the issue here that did it? Most of these vessels, this is a 2015 vessel. We tend to think these vessels are very high tech, but in truth, they're very analog in many ways. Does it mean that there could have been some issue, going on with electronics in the vessel? No. But again, the idea that you're going to get the exact moment and trigger it off so it hits a bridge is almost impossible. It's a near impossible feat to do. And like you said, when we talked about this earlier today, when the power goes out, you're on for the ride. There's nothing you can do. They dropped an anchor. An anchor at 8 knots is not going to do a thing. Matter of fact, it's probably more dangerous for the crew to drop the anchor than anything else. You're just not going to get any response. So it's amazing what we saw happen. I think the response by the crew and the pilot is about the best you can get. What are you hearing in regards to other issues associated with this? I've been talking to a lot of outlets and media, a lot of questions about why tugs weren't with the vessel, questions about the maintenance of this vessel, the upkeep of the vessel. The vessel just had an inspection in September up in New York by the U.S. Coast Guard under its provisions. I thought maybe you can address that. Then we'll field some questions here from everyone. And also, if you are asking questions, please take the time, either capitalize them at all, the entire quote, so I can find it very quickly. I know you're not yelling at me. You may be yelling at me, but I'm going to assume it's a question. Or add question at the front, and I will try to get as many of them as we can. I got a hard stop at 8:45, so we're going to try to bang through as many as we can. Go ahead, John.
Excellent. I was on the BBC just now with a bridge expert. I think that's the most compelling. There was a great thread on Twitter about the bridge, the dolphins around it. So modern
And if you
bridges.
follow John or I, we both forwarded that. We retweeted that. It's a great tweet, and I'll actually include it in the end comments for this video. Go ahead.
But it's not just because we saw that this happened in 1980 with the Tampa Skyhook Bridge, and caused a catastrophic collapse. I think over 30 people died. And then after that, bridges were built to have stronger support structures. But it's not just the support structure around. They actually fill in, so they make purposefully low water around that and in the lead up, so that the ship actually runs aground before hitting into the structure. And we saw that it can be built to better standards. We had the Casco Busan in 2007. It didn't hit straight on. It clipped the Oakland Bay Bridge on the side, but no damage to the bridge. Now this bridge was built in 1977. When I went on the BBC, they said this bridge has been here for a half century. It was built in March 1977. I was like, that's my birthday. I can't believe I'm a half century old, but it was before that Tampa Bridge, Sal. So the question is, we learn these lessons. Do we go back? Have we inspected all of these bridges? Should you need a tug here? No. There should be enough. This is an unusual incident. The pilots are well trained. They can make that call, but you start to compound these problems. Just in normal circumstances, you don't need a tug in various areas, but if there is critical infrastructure that doesn't have these protective dolphins and the low water around it, that adds to the risk profile. And at that point, when you have a higher risk profile, that's where you need tugs. Now, we don't have the budget. We know that there's a $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill. Secretary Pete has this, but less than $1 billion, or less than like 0.06%. I mean, it's a tiny amount of that infrastructure has been going to all the maritime infrastructure. So the money's there, but MARAD, the Maritime Administration's tiny. Even if they wanted to get off the ball and really get the ports dredged and the bridges inspected and all the other things, they would have trouble doing that. Bridges are also Army Corps of Engineers. We've seen the Army pull away from watercraft and maritime projects as they spend money in Iraq and Afghanistan. You've seen these Navy salvage ships, which would not be, you would use commercial salvage here, but could augment it to speed up the process. The Navy doesn't have those anymore. It's retiring most of them.
I do think, one of the things that we discussed earlier today in a conversation we had, the important priority right now is rescue, obviously, but we can do multiple things at the same time. And one of the things that needs to be talked about right now is, yes, we're in a rescue operation. Unfortunately, we may transition to a recovery operation if we can't save the lives of those who are missing. But we really, hopefully, somebody is looking at the idea of moving salvage and rescue material into place here, because clearing the bridge from between the two pylons is going to be a major endeavor. And, until you do that, a good chunk of the port of Baltimore is closed. There is a container and coal facility outside there, but there's the vast majority of the Seagirt, the Dundalk, and a lot of the other facilities are really shut off at this time. So let me take a moment here.
We don't have short sea shipping in this country. So in Europe, they would just move that containers to barges and put them elsewhere in the port. But now when a major ship comes into the port of Baltimore, it all goes on the roads, and now we have a major roadway closed. So it's
right.
That's a pretty crowded area as it is before you eliminate that bridge.
Okay. Before we go, John, if we can ask you to just turn up your volume just a little bit more, if you can.
Absolutely, I would be happy.
And then I'm going to start taking some questions here. So, from Eric, why does the ship crew not use the onboard horn to warn people on the bridge when the emergency power came back on? That could have saved lives. Ship horns are super loud. I got to say, would you even know what the ship's horn is blasting at? And would you hear it under? Basically, the ship is under the bridge at that time, and roadside traffic. There's a question about, they initiated from the conversation I just had, I read, they contacted the pilot's office. The pilot's office contacted Maryland DOT. They went out on the VHF radio and announced that. So there was an emergency that was sounded. We are very fortunate, I think, that this did not happen during rush hour, because the loss of life would have been catastrophic. Not that any loss of life is good, but we could have seen a much greater loss of life on that. Anything you want to add to that, John?
No, just going back to the tug question is okay. We have other bridges that do not have the protection around their columns. Are we going to upgrade those bridges? Well, we didn't upgrade and inspect all the bridges after the Tampa incident. We didn't do it after the Costco Busan incident. We tend to forget about these things. There's a lot of focus now. Well, will we remember in a few months? And so why don't we start those inspections now? And if we identify these bridges, which we should be able to do quickly by really seeding out a lot of engineers to get on this, well, those bridges that are vulnerable, we can station tugboats there. You have it up in Valdez, Alaska. Pilots got off, a couple miles after they left Valdez, and then the captain went to sleep, and the junior officer went around Bly Reef after the Exxon Valdez. Those pilots, and there's a tug stationed near Bly Reef. So I don't think the tugs are a permanent solution, but let's identify what other bridges are vulnerable and get some tugs in there until there are longer term fixes.
And of course, the big issue with tugs is going to be the cost and the availability. There's a lot of associates with it. For those of you just tuning in, I'm Sal Mercogliano. This is What's Going On with Shipping, my YouTube channel. That's John Konrad, actually John Konrad over there. He is the CEO, former merchant mariner captain, head of gCaptain, one of the best news sources out there. I definitely recommend it. So question from Ariel, what's a good guesstimate that the bridge would be cleared in order for the ship to travel through again? Any idea, John?
I really don't. Biden promised all resources to fix this problem, but we just got Biden promising that he'd build this giant pier in Gaza. A lot of that equipment could be used in Baltimore now, but it's not here, and we don't have extra equipment. We don't have extra Navy salvage. So first we have to identify all the salvage and then get it in. Maybe you can enlighten your viewers on how long it took to salvage the Golden Ray. I think there will be more pressure from the government and more government resources to do a better job here. But going at the normal pace of American salvage, this could take a while.
Yeah, Golden Ray was a car carrier leaving Brunswick, Georgia, that rolled over on its side, and they actually sawed the vessel into pieces. And that was 3 years, 4 years endeavor right there. Obviously, the priority is going to be removing the section of the bridge between the pylons to open the channel up, which it's going to be weeks into months without a problem here. I think the question is, these are big chunks, big pieces. You're talking about concrete. You're talking about multiple road sections here. You got to remove the ship. That's the other issue there. There's a lot going on here. The complete bridge that collapsed doesn't cover the passageway of the channel. So it's only the section between those pylons. So, it could be removed fairly quickly. It depends on the amount of resources and effort and money thrown at this. And we're not even going to start talking about liability yet on this. Because understand, this is where you see international shipping play a role here. This is a Singapore flag vessel owned by a Singapore company leased to a Danish shipping firm, Maersk, with an Indian crew on board. The insurance is through Britain. The classification society, I believe, is Japanese. You're coming out of the port of Baltimore, which is local control. You're in Maryland pilots on board, and you're in U.S. national waters under the Coast Guard, and the liability issues here drive me crazy thinking about this, because and don't even bring in things like general average and all the other things that come in here of how it's going to be done. There's going to be this is a mess and of epic proportions right now.
And the big question, the NTSB spokesman said that the number one priority is doing the salvage with the environment. We saw that in the Golden Ray. That was part of the reason for a full year delay, is because they had to have so many environmental analysts. And then the local residents got so angry and things were so slow that all the environmental regulations went out the window, and they had multiple oil spills, and no one seemed to care. So that's another question. You have all this attention on safety and environment at first, and then as people get frustrated over the years, it all goes out the window. How do you do a moderate response? We want to protect the environment, but we don't want to go overboard. That's something we don't do well here. It's all or nothing.
I agree. Eric, I'm not sure we have a number yet. I haven't heard one announced yet on number of vehicles on it. Obviously, Maryland DOT would be looking at that. That would be driving the rescue operation. I got to say something about rescue. Volunteer firefighter here for 25 years, worked as a paid firefighter. This is an epic rescue going on here right now. There's a lot. This is miserable diving conditions. It's cold water. It's bad visibility. There's current, and you're in wreckage. I can't think of something more hazardous than, unless there were killer sharks still swimming around. This is about as deadly as you can get in doing this. So those crews out there right now are risking their lives trying to see if anyone could have potentially have survived. And unfortunately, as the time goes on, it becomes less of a chance. This is from Gary Hoover. I keep wondering if these big ships need to depend on tugs until they are through such hazards as bridge. I know that would be costly, but look at the consequences of not doing so. So we kind of alluded to that to a little bit before, John. I mean, you would have basically a tug escort all the way down to the Bay Bridge, and how many tugs does Baltimore have? There was a vessel that just came off the berth before Dali left. Those tugs came back and removed Dali. So you would need extra tugs. This would be extra money. And of course, shipping companies don't pay for this. You pay for it, the consumer. It's always going to be on top of you.
Yeah, the pilots would like to have 10 tugs taking them all the way out past Norfolk. That's what they would like. But the realities of the economics is if they order tugs too often, that goes onto the bill and it makes that port less attractive. Pilots get a percentage of all the tonnage that they get through. So if they have these huge tugboat costs in Baltimore, the major carriers, MSC, Maersk, are just going to go to Savannah or Baltimore. So there's this unspoken economic pressure to pushing them to order less tugs than may be required. And it's these pilots are not bridge experts either. What was great about this BBC interview is get a ship captain with a bridge expert. This is a very siloed industry,
yeah,
and you don't get all of the pieces together until it's too late.
Yeah, John, do you know if the Port of Baltimore has plugins for ships? Commercial ships don't often plug in because it's just the nature. You're there so short amount of time. You tend to cycle through, unlike Navy vessels or ships that are at berths for long periods of time.
This was a major a number of years ago. It really started in LA, increasing the electrical capacity so that they could plug in the ships and turn off the engines. And there were questions then about if the engines are off for too long, do they get cold and then restarting it? So I don't know specifically if Baltimore did that, but I know there was a major effort and a number of ports did it. They never got to full capacity though.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big push with the green environment and ESG to try to do this, but again, it's a lot of power too. I mean, it's a massive amount of power that you need when you start having ships in port. Sal was almost certainly electrical. It was blowing fuses in port and losing power fully for a couple of days. So again, we don't have. I don't know who this is, but there's a comment right there going on here. You are going straight down the channel at slack tide. Why would the ship veer hard to starboard? John, you kind of talked about this in one of your interviews I saw earlier today.
Right, there are a number of cases. One, if you back down fully, that prop is gonna walk to port, pushing the bow to starboard. Another is that wind pushing. We saw, you can see from that smoke, the wind is coming in, and there were a lot of containers forward. All those containers are sail area. I talked to another pilot, and there's a channel, a small boat channel that comes right before it, and he thought possibly bank suction as you're coming down a narrow channel. You're pushing water ahead, and it's kind of keeping you in the center of that channel. And then as you go, when there's a channel that comes sideways, it's not really current, but that suction is relieved, and it can pull your stern to starboard, which would cause ship handling problems. So there are a number of potential reasons why.
Yeah, and I think again, I think the wind is probably the biggest issue we're seeing right there. Definitely, it's a major factor here. All right, going on here. Let's see what we got here. What alternatives are there to mitigate the supply chain issues of the port shutdown? So, I talked about this just recently, talking about what this means. A lot of things can go to other ports. Containers you can move, cars you can move, passengers you can move, but that does create a problem in that you're overloading other ports. Shippers tend to want their cargo to arrive at a specific port for a reason. They have facilities maybe for receiving that cargo. Cars coming in there have to be prepped and sent to dealerships. Now you're landing them at different ports. This is like getting, you're flying into Los Angeles and you get diverted to Las Vegas. Well, you're in the United States, but you're not in the right spot. You still have to get to your ultimate destination. And then the big thing for Baltimore is that it is a huge coal exporting terminal. I mean, just massive. And if you I haven't been able to figure out exactly how much capacity is behind the bridge now, but it's a lot. There's a lot of capacity that's behind there, and so we're going to see a big impact. I mean, Port of Baltimore handles $74 billion last year, 43 million tons of cargo. And come tomorrow morning, a fraction of that is going to be moving in the Port of Baltimore. And so for ILA dock workers, for truck drivers, for rail, they're going to be trying to figure out what exactly is going to happen here until that port opens back up. And that creates a big problem, obviously, going forward.
That was a big question with the port congestion crisis at the tail end of COVID there. Everyone says, well, why don't those ships, why are they waiting there for months? Why don't they just go to a different port? Well, all that cargo is pre-booked to a certain destination, and you have to get all of the owners of all that cargo to agree to go somewhere else. And then once they all decided they're going to go to another port, they all picked Savannah, and there was a huge backup there. So this industry is not very good at talking to each other. Every segment is siloed, and even amongst segments like container shipping, often the various companies, are competitors and don't manage, and they're very limited options, right? In the UK or in the Europe, you have better rail, you have short sea shipping, you have barges, you can move in other ways. Here, everything goes on trucks, and when you combine it with the closure of the bridge, which is a major artery, that's when you have these domino effect.
Well, yeah, and we've been seeing this. One of my favorite sayings is, we keep seeing these black swan events. Black swans are supposed to be a rare little bird, but we seem to be getting hit by a flock of them. This ship was leaving to go to Sri Lanka. It was to get to Sri Lanka from Baltimore, you go east, you go through the Mediterranean, through the Suez to get to Sri Lanka. You don't go through the Panama Canal. But again, this is being impacted by the Houthis of all people. And so, I mean, this is the impact we're seeing in the global supply chain, that this ship is going a different route, probably contracted by Maersk to fill in a gap because of the excess capacity that they need to move cargo around. So this is going to have an impact. And we keep seeing these small hits. Let's not forget, it was 2 years ago this month that Everforward, coming out of Baltimore, nearly shut the channel that time when it grounded. And it was 3 years before that Ever Given went sideways in the Suez. So I mean, it's bad. March seems to be a bad month for shipping all the time. We just seem to have that all the time. Okay, Dave Ruff asked, why is nobody asking the crew what happened? John, why are we not having the crew on here right now talking to us?
I guarantee the Coast Guard is asking. They're going to drug test them. They're going to alcohol test them. They're lining them up. They're going to interrogate them. They're getting asked a lot of questions right now, but they're being told do not talk to the press. Don't go on social media. Some of this is good and bad, and it's always a question when we. One thing I continually get is, why don't we wait for the facts to come out until we report on this? Well, the report doesn't come out for a year. And when a year happens, no one's interested in the event anymore. We have very detailed analytics on gCaptain of what people click on. And there's a huge, overwhelming number of people click on stories in the beginning. A year later, when we have the final report, no one reads it. Some dedicated people like Sal and me and a few other read it. But this is why problems aren't getting fixed. We were taught, you and I were taught at SUNY Maritime College, that regulations are written in the blood of mariners before us. These incidents are what causes the safety. And we're talked about Titanic's bringing in more lifeboats and Solus wrecks. That's not necessarily the case anymore. We had the El Faro, the American ship, got caught in a hurricane, sank with everyone on board, died. And there were very specific findings: covered lifeboats, portable EPIRBs in all the lifeboats. There were a number of findings. Well, now we have the hospital ship Comfort still doesn't have covered lifeboats. We still don't have redundant EPIRBs in the ships. Why? Because no one reads them a year later, so no one demands that the Navy and the Coast Guard take action. So I think it's important to get the information out there. Preface it by saying, this is we're not sure about these. These are the possibilities. But I'm less interested in what happened. I'm more interested in knocking off what didn't happen, right? All these conspiracy theories and all the things. So I think you can give valuable information, but that's why we do it now.
And I'll add to that, John, too. One of the things is, for example, one of the potential scenarios here, bad fuel. You talked about it a minute ago. Well, if it's bad fuel, that needs to be said now because there are other ships that potential, and it's not like this is not unheard of. Let me be clear. We had a big incident in Singapore here recently where we saw this happen, where ships had it. We had a lot of ships when they were shifting over to the new fuels had problems, breakdowns all the time. We almost had a ship ground off Santa Barbara. This is a big issue, and again, my point about this all the time is you raise the issue now and you start asking the questions because you want to make sure that people understand it too. Plus, let me be clear, John and I know this stuff. We live this stuff. We know it. We have contacts of people out there. And what's happening right now is industry is telling everybody not to talk, don't say anything, don't get involved, just be quiet out there. But we can hear from people, and we hear from people who are involved in this all the time, who give us very good perspective. But the one thing that they say to me all the time, I'm trying to say the same thing to you, John, just don't say my name because I don't want to get
Yes,
fired.
it's hard. It's
But
very hard to get anyone on the record.
right. But, and so, we're going to kind of report on what it is because, again, if this happened in the port of Baltimore, understand this could happen in LA. This could happen with the Verrazano Bridge. It could happen with the Bayonne Bridge. This can happen, again, in a situation where all of a sudden we see a lot of loss of life. And so I think it's really important for us to talk about it. We do that with aviation all the time. People will always start breaking down what happened in an aviation incident. And we should do that in the maritime incident. One of the reasons that you put a story out fast and I put a story out first thing this morning was to make sure that there was a source out there that's talking maritime, that understands what people are seeing here. Because again, most of us, like many industries, we talk in a silo. We talk among ourselves, but we don't talk very well to people outside. All right, let me throw this question up here. What short-term solutions can they come up with to return shipping traffic to the harbor? Well, John was talking about short sea shipping. We talked about diverting vessels. Anything else you think of, John?
They really have to step up this salvage operation. They need there are allies. When you talk to the Navy, they are always like, well, we have all these allied capabilities. We've given up our salvage. We've given up fireboats. We've given up, but we have allied capabilities. Well, the Dutch are the salvage experts. They have huge heavy lift, heavy construction vessels. Bring them in. Get the government to bring them in and get them overweight. We don't even need a plan, but they have to. They're all working jobs right now. They're all doing something. You have to reserve that now. And unfortunately, there are a number of salvage companies. There's some really good ones. We started this channel. Our first interview was with the Salvage Master in South Africa. Yep. But the gold standard of the salvage world is Schmidt, Boskala Schmidt in Rotterdam, and I've been told they've already been sidelined on this project. So why are we sidelining the best? Why the ship owner usually gets to pick the salvage company, and they want to pick the cheapest, so they don't go with Schmidt. Well, this is a national emergency, so Secretary Pete and the Navy, who needs to use that port, the Army, which needs to load in that port, and they need to come in and with the Coast Guard say, we need all the salvage companies and we need to start bringing these assets in because we don't have them left in the United States.
And let's be clear, the person in charge of this right now is the captain of the Port of Baltimore. That is the person who is overseeing this. The NTESB came out and said something about being in charge of coordinating. But let's be clear, it's the port captain. And port captains in the U.S. Coast Guard have amazing powers. I mean, they literally can sideline presidents. They have that ability. And the question is going to be, we're talking about the salvage of the ship. That's one thing because the bridge is literally sitting on the bow of the ship. But then we have the salvage of clearing the channel, and that's that's U.S. Coast Guard. That is navigable waterways. That's Coast Guard and Army Corps of Engineers. So this is purely federal government now that has to get involved in this and start making this channel work. And who are they going to bring in? Because you're talking about removing a bridge, and that is a massive amount of steel, concrete that's got to be moved. And this is not an easy project at all. And so the scale here, we can be doing a rescue and recovery at the same time mobilizing this. And I was kind of shocked that Smith Bocalis was not the one. Now, there's other good firms out there, Resolve and a few others that are out there. But the question is going to be who's going to be tasked with doing
Excellent.
this.
But this is a bigger job. They should be working together. We shouldn't pick one. We should pick, Resolve and Smith and a few of the others, right?
Right, because it's going to involve that and everything. So, how many of the construction workers have been located? I believe that there's still 6 missing. The last number I saw. I don't know if you heard anything different, John.
That's what I heard. They think is missing. I didn't hear that they were specifically construction workers, but
Okay. This is from Captain Jerry Donnelly. Astoria, Oregon, Megler Bridge would trap 108 miles of Columbia River ports, including Portland. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I know John and I try to do is really raise the attention of the role of shipping and infrastructure like this. You build a bridge 50 years ago. This bridge was built on March 23rd of 1977. Ships like Dali didn't exist. No one envisioned a ship 400 meters long, 1,300 feet, carrying over 10,000 containers. And today, Dali isn't even a big container ship. She wouldn't even, she doesn't even rank up there with the big ones. And the infrastructure that's built to protect these bridges, is it really pales in terms of the type of vessels that are out there. And it's not like you're going to be able to drag this bridge out of the way and throw a new bridge up. You're going to have to design a new bridge. There's going to be considerations to go higher, to make the port more accessible to shipping. There's going to be a lot of features that go into this. This question, John, what will be the long-term impacts, especially the local area? What do you think?
Well, the local area is in really trouble. You have all of those longshoremen. I mean, it's a big port town. You have all the longshoremen, the local workers, the warehouses, the rail, and everything else. So, what are they going to do for work now? Are they going to get federal stimulus or put on other projects? Or are they going somewhere else? But we are a highway centric country. A big part of the reason why this happened is because we put our money into roads. Roads are incredibly subsidized, and we are reliant on them. We don't have a backup plan. Back when our friend Admiral Besby was head of the Maritime Administrator, he says the thing that keeps him up at night is the George Washington Bridge, because it's absolutely critical to get supplies to the submarine base, our shipyards up there, some of the Army bases, the Air Force Base up here in Springfield with F-35s. They all go over roads. That wasn't the case. Nassim Taleb has this Unfragile book, talk about fragile systems versus unfragile, putting all your eggs in one basket. All our eggs are in the road basket. And this was an accident. I mean, there's a small chance that a computer virus was put into the engine room to shut it down as a trigger. Is that possible? Yes. Most likely, this was an accident. But if someone wanted to be malicious, this is not any more difficult than crashing an airliner into the Twin Towers. This is very much possible with the number of ships. Some of our adversaries giving military training, communication training, advanced technology to their basic seafarers. A number of bridges could be taken out at once. I'm not saying this is going to happen, but that's the military's job, is to plan for things that are unlikely. And obviously they don't have a plan for this, right?
Right. And, again, I think, and I'm going to apologize to everybody. We got to cut it at 8:45. So I've got about 15 more minutes here, and appreciate everybody coming on. Excuse me, about 5 minutes here. Appreciate everybody coming on. Over 8,000 people tuning in. I really appreciate everybody coming in here. We're going to try to hit some more of these questions real quick going through. I'm just trying to jump through.
Just really quick, Sal, we are told all the time by the military folks on Twitter, the navalists, saying there's a plan, it's confidential, you don't see the plan. And we keep saying there isn't a plan. And this is the case. Okay, you have a confidential plan. Where's the plan for Baltimore? Where is it? Enact it. Start it up. So obviously there isn't a plan, or they wouldn't enact it right now, right?
Yep. So this one, I've seen this, the Dali was involved in a crash in Antwerp in 2016. This, to me, none of the crew who was on the ship then would be on the ship now by any means, probably. You're talking about a long time ago, but it goes back to the operation of the vessel. Is this represent a systematic issue with the vessel? This is run through a Singapore company. Is it Sea Energy, or who is it? Who runs it, Chris?
Sea Energy, yeah. And these are the questions that ask. So this is a relatively small firm that's ostensibly based in Singapore, but really is an Indian base. It's a Indian entrepreneur created this. He made a deal with a number of Japanese clients in order to, they do usually in the shipping world. Crewing's one agency, operations is another, legal's another, and it's all a patchwork. Well, Sea Energy decided we're going to put crewing and operations in one house. We're going to make real deals with the Indian academies and experts in India, really good ones, to do this, and we're going to cater to the Japanese clients, and they were successful. But just recently, in the last few months, the largest publicly listed shipping company in America, mostly foreign ship, Genco, made a deal with Synergy. So this is a question. This goes back to my book on the Deepwater Horizon. Did I see any criminal actions? No. But as the price of oil went from $16 when I started to $160 or $130, whatever it got up to there, everyone was promoted above their pay grade, and there was this saturation of talent. A lot of the best were pulled off. So a lot of these Synergy guys were really good in India. Were they overworked? How did they manage this large influx of clients at a large time? Were balls dropped? Absolutely. Anytime you
Right.
grow that fast, balls are dropped. Was this one of the balls they dropped? That we don't know.
Comment by Jeff, NTSB not allowed on board. Why? Well, if the NTSB is not allowed on board, it's because the ship is still involved in this incident. That's probably why. If not, the Coast Guard will secure the vessel data recorders. They will turn them over for investigation. That is fairly typical. That's going to be done. I just heard that the drug unit was heading out to go drug test everybody. So that was being done. So, I mean, there's a lot of pieces that are going on here at the same time. But you still have a ship that's involved it's tied up in the wreck. I mean, so it's not like this is static at the moment. They're going to have to get the ship out, and that's going to involve some work. So you really don't need inspectors on board. What you need to do is document and record, and then let it go. Question here: can a ship be cyber hacked? I remember the White House recently said our ports were at risk. That was the issue with the cranes, and John, you kind of alluded to that a few minutes ago too.
Yeah, that's a major concern for American flagships, which carry military cargo. They're getting repaired in China, and a lot of the engineers are being sent home. Is it possible that China puts a virus in and a communication link to shut down the engine room when a war starts? Yes. Is it likely? Probably not. But you need access into this engine control system. The the engine, and the bridge system, it's not like connected to the internet. There's an air gap. It's hard for you as a hacker to just hack through with the internet. And these ships, as we know, don't have great internet. They don't have great connectivity. But if you have access, that's the question. If you are an insider in the shipping industry, if you're an inspector and have access in those shipyards, they can be cyber hacked. Can they be cyber hacked by a regular criminal? That's difficult.
So, a couple of questions here. Number one, how many ships are stuck up in Baltimore and the area? We're going to figure that out. We don't know yet. We're trying to get that number put together of that. Who is the ship's insurance company? I know Britannia is the P&I club, I believe. I don't know who has hull and machinery on it. Do you know, John?
No, I don't.
Okay. U.S. Navy Supervisor Salvage will be in charge. Well, I don't think there's a supervisor of salvage anymore in the U.S. Navy. That's one of the problems. Is the U.S. Navy has subcontracted its salvage out to a consortium of Smith and Resolve, I believe. Right, John?
No, it's Smith and it's at the tip of my tongue now. But this is, Smith is one of the best in the in the world. So that's something a few experts in Baltimore have been telling me today, that they hope the Navy takes over, not because the Navy has the assets and the bandwidth to really take this over, but if the Navy is put in charge, then Smith, what's the U.S. subsidiary, I forget their name. I'm sorry. They will, they will take over the contract. Right now, they're not with the contract because the ship owner doesn't want to pay that extra expense. But if the Navy is made the federal agency, then the Navy has outsourced this to Smith, who happens to be good. But again, Smith, the Navy used to have pre-positioned assets all around, so things are ready. A commercial company is not going to do that. They're going to see what's available close and find the cheapest stuff. That's not necessarily the fastest stuff. This is why we have to start bringing in equipment from overseas, particularly from the Netherlands.
Yeah, quick question from Dave. When the ship's service generators and propulsion engines have separate day tanks for fuel, which they would, but again, if they're switching over from types of fuel, that may be one of the issues. I mean, we did see the emergency generator come on, and this is the big question we have. What you saw happen on the video was the ship goes dark. There's a period of time when there's nothing, and then all of a sudden the ship's power comes back on. We get a black smoke coming out of the stack, which is either the emergency diesels kicking on or they're trying to back down, and then the ship loses power again just before it hits the piling. And a question obviously is what happens. You really can't quite tell that from just watching smoke come out of the vessel, unfortunately. John, anything you want to add to that?
No, no, that's all a good point, Sal. Yeah, the other possibility is they switch to a different tank that there's very low sulfur from the maneuvering fuel. Yeah, a lot of possibilities. We aren't sure.
Yeah. All right. In the last few minutes we got, John, I just want to kind of say what I'm on looking out for in the next day or two, watching this story evolve. So obviously, number one, really interested to see if we get a statement out of the Coast Guard about past inspections of this vessel and what was, what's the history of it. I have gotten notes from people, which I can't confirm by any means, and we saw it here in this stream. The ship was losing power at the dock. There was issues with it. If there was a systematic engineering issue with the ship, was that conveyed to the pilots? Did the pilots know about this? If the pilots knew about this, they would have probably have acted differently. Did alert go to the Coast Guard about this? We don't know. And this ship was leased from CNG to Maersk, so it's not a Maersk vessel, but it's operating under Maersk. So the liability issues here are going to be extreme right now. I think what we want to hear is a plan for how they're going to first remove the vessel, ensure that the vessel is stable. It did ram the piling, so there is damage to the vessel, making sure it's not leaking, that there's no environmental issue. And then what are the assets? How are we going to start undertaking a salvage operation to clear the channel, which is going to be the immediate priority here? John, what about you?
Yeah, I'm really, we need to find this investigation. Unfortunately, most of these investigation reports take over a year, and there are two ways that this investigation can go. It can be shut down by the NTSB, handled internally, and we pretty much just get a report in a year. If you have specific information, you can contact the NTSB and provide it to them, and they will listen. But it's pretty much a closed loop, and the results may not go into all the systemic issues. The other way is that we have a full hearing, like we saw with the El Faro. Now, the results may not be any better, but there's a lot more opportunity to participate. They will have a hearing. The public can attend the hearing. You can ask questions of the prosecutors. And the other interesting thing in the United States we do is we have parties of responsibility. So the ship owner, potentially the charterer, definitely the flag state. They will all be given a seat at the trial. And it's actually not the judge. It'll be usually a Coast Guard judge. It could be NTSB or a federal judge, but usually a Coast Guard judge. It's not the questions that they ask that really dive into this, but the questions that the opposing parties, the flag versus the ship owner, because they're all going into lawsuits later. So they want to make their case, and
Yeah.
they'll often expose information. Now, this information may not help us solve this case, and it's a limited value. This happened or that happened. But these hearings can dive into these broader systemic issues. What was the issue with the bridges and the Corps of Army Engineers and the Navy salvage? These are other questions that can come out if we have a hearing. Typically, hearings only happen if it's a major, there's some public outcry. But this is a large enough incident. I think it's likely that we get a full hearing, and that should be interesting. It should bring information to the table, not even related to this incident, just that could make the wider shipping industry safer going forward.
Yeah, I listen. There's so much about this that we need to process and get out. John, I want to thank you for jumping on with me tonight for a quick little Q&A. I apologize for everyone who submitted questions that we didn't get to. There was a lot. Again, we had over 8,000 people watching with questions coming in. We tried to hit as many as we can. To keep yourself up to date on this, again, head over to gCaptain, John Konrad at gCaptain, one of the best sources you'll have out there. Subscribe and like over to my channel, what's going on with shipping. We will keep you abreast. We're going to keep covering covering this story because it is evolving story. Matter of fact, we both probably have news. I gotta jump on a news site right now for.
Is there a list of all of the news appearances you've been so we can watch them all?
Yeah, no, there's not, and everything.
Maybe one of your fans or followers can come up with a list and we can retweet it on Twitter because I want to watch them all.
I hope not. But in all seriousness, and John and I appreciate everybody tuning into this. Our thoughts and prayers go out to those who lost their lives today on
Absolutely.
this. And one of the reasons why we talk about this is to try to prevent this from happening again in the future. And hopefully we the amount of accidents that almost happen, we never hear about. That's the great news. That's what we want to report on. We don't want to report on a tragedy like this. Has been a bad day. And so, John, I appreciate you being on and everything. I got to run. Be sure to tune in both to What's Going On with Shipping and gCaptain with John Konrad. John, thank you so much, sir.
Thank you for having me, Sal.
All right, bye.